Hello and welcome to this first look exploring session, looking at the passage of our most dread sovereign lady, Queen Elizabeth, through the city of London to Westminster, the day before her coronation in 1558, or in new money, 1559. This is a couple of witnesses that we've got here. It's January. It's the 14th of January. And Queen is going to get coronated, as it were. And there's various street things going on that we are going to have a little look at. We have got lots of Latin stuff that is demonstrated, which I've got some slides, so we're not going to be reading that out. We're going to put the Latin up so that you can see it, and almost all of it, not quite all of it. There's some bits we don't have. We got a couple of witnesses for stuff that happened on the day, and other bits and pieces, and we're going to see how that goes. There might be some additional witnesses to this event, but we're not doing them today. But this is filtering into our wider look at royal entries, civic pageantry, all our stuff that we've already done on Lord Mayor's show, and just generally, getting more of a picture of things. So, reading with us today, Greg, introduce yourself to the room.
Hello, I'm Greg. I feel like I'm getting the word veteran with these things, the civic pageantry now.
Liza, introduce yourself to the room.
Liza Graham, in London. I don't know if I'm a veteran or not. Some days I wake up and it's like I'm still in Cheapside. Cheapside, man. Still in Cheapside.
And Tom, introduce yourself. Oh, we've lost your sound, Tom. You're not muted, but we can't hear you. Ooh, some terrible technical things gone wrong there. So we'll introduce Eric. Well, hopefully that sorts itself out. Eric, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Eric, and hi, I'm here. I made it.
Yay! Technical gremlings continue, but Tom is with us and with sound. Introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Tom from Brighton.
And I'm your host, Robert Crighton. Yes, we're all going to be reading in a sort of order of orderness. We'll take a paragraph at a time and dance through this text. So we're going to go round Greg, then Liza, then Tom, then Eric, and then myself, and then we'll go around again. Or pause, depending on when pausiness might want to happen, as it were. So, we're starting off, Greg. We're starting off the beginning of this particular account, the receiving of the Queen's Majesty, the day before her coronation in 1558, because the new year doesn't start until March.
The receiving of the Queen's Majesty. Upon Saturday, which was the 14th day of January in the year of our Lord, 1558, about 2 o'clock at afternoon, the most noble and Christian princess, our most dread sovereign lady, Elizabeth, by the grace of God, Queen of England, France, and Ireland, defender of the faith, etc., 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 marched from the Tower to pass through the city of London towards Westminster, richly furnished and most honourably accompanied, as well with gentlemen, barons, and other the nobilities of this realm, as also with a noble train of goodly and beautiful ladies, richly appointed.
And entering the city was of the people received marvellous entirely, as appeared by the assembly's prayers, wishes, welcomings, cries, tender words, and all other signs, which argue a wonderful earnest love of most obedient subjects towards their sovereign. And on the other side, her grace, by holding up her hands and merry countenance to such as stood afar off, and most tender and gentle language to those that stood nigh to her grace, did declare herself no less thankfully to receive her people's good will than they lovingly offered it unto her.
To all that wished her grace well, she gave hearty thanks, and to such bade God save her grace. She said again, God save them all, and thanked with all her heart. so that on either side there was nothing but gladness, nothing but prayer, nothing but comfort.
The Queen's Majesty rejoiced marvelously to see this, so exceedingly showed towards her grace, which all good princes have ever desired. I mean, so earnest love of subjects so evidently declared even to her grace's own person, being carried in the midst of them. The people, again, were wonderfully ravished with the loving answers and gestures of their princess, like the which they had before tried at her first coming to the town from Hatfield. This her grace's loving behavior, preconceived in the people's heads upon these considerations, was then thoroughly confirmed, and indeed implanted a wonderful hope in them, touching her worthy government in the rest of her reign.
For in all her passage she did not only show her most gracious love towards the people in general, but also privately, if the baser personages had either offered her grace any flowers or such like, as a signification of their goodwill, or moved to her any suit, she most gently, to the common rejoicings of all lookers-on and private company of the party, stayed her chariot and heard their requests. So that if a man should say well, he could not better term the city of London that time than a stage wherein was showed the wonderful spectacle of a noble-hearted princess towards her most loving people, and the people's exceeding comfort in beholding so worthy a sovereign and hearing so prince-like a voice, which could not but have set the enemy on fire, since the virtue is in the enemy always commended, much more could not but inflame her natural, obedient, and most loving people, whose weal leaneth only upon her grace and her government. I think we should pause there. That sort of sets the scene quite nicely. I get the impression that this is a reasonably partial account. I think they're all very much on the side of the Queen. You know, she never refused any flowers from one of the passers-by. No, absolutely. She always took the flowers in. I'm sure she probably had a system to hand them immediately to someone else. And I'm sure she's clearly very good at doing the, and what do you do? Stuff.
Yeah, true story. One of my singing teachers received a CBE, and he received it, in fact, from the Queen herself. And she shook his hand and said, "So, how long have you been doing this?" So, which just a wonderful all-purpose question that you can ask of anyone who's receiving a CBE.
Mm. Yeah, and the people are wishing her grace well, and she says hearty thanks. I mean, she must have worked for hours on that level of public discourse. Yeah, so lots of people. We don't have the same extent of lists of who's following who or and the order of things. We've got a certain amount of detail at the beginning in this particular account. But we've just got sort of lists. There's gentlemen, there's barons, there's other nobility and stuff as they move forward. Any other thoughts before we actually get down to something that is more on point in the sense of actually what the spectacle in London is going to be like? No? Okay, let's go around the room again, where we'll go from Greg again, which means, Eric, you get to be a child. And actually get to do some performy text. But yeah, Greg, then Liza, then Tom, etc.
Thus, therefore, the Queen's Majesty passed from the Tower till she came to Fenchurch, the people on each side joyously beholding the view of so gracious a lady, their Queen, and her Grace no less gladly noting and observing the same.
Near unto Fenchurch was erected a scaffold richly furnished, whereon stood a noise of instruments, and a child in costly apparel, which was appointed to welcome the Queen's Majesty in the whole city's behalf.
Against which place, when her Majesty came, of her own will she commanded the chariot to be stayed, and that the noise might be appeased till the child had uttered his welcoming oration, which he spake in English metre, as here followeth.
O peerless sovereign queen, behold what this thy town hath thee presented with at thy first entrance here. Behold with how rich hope she leadeth thee to thy crown. Behold with what two gifts she comforteth thy cheer. The first is blessing tongues, which many a welcome say, which pray thou mayest do well, which praise thee to the sky, which to thy kingdom heaps all that in tongues can lie. The second is true hearts, which love thee from their root, whose suit is triumph now, and ruleth all the game, which faithfulness has won, and all untruth driven out, which skip for joy when as they hear thy happy name. Welcome, therefore, O Queen, as much as heart can think. Welcome again, O Queen, as much as heart can tell. Welcome to joyous tongues and hearts that will not shrink. God thee preserve, we pray, and wish thee ever well.
At the which words of the last line, the people gave a great shout.
Way.
Thank you.
Uh,
Wishing with one assent, as the child had said. And the Queen's Majesty thanked most heartily both the city for this her gentle receiving at the first, and also the people for confirming the same. Here was noted in the Queen's Majesty's countenance during the time that the child spake, besides a perpetual attentiveness in her face, a marvellous change in look, as the child's words touched either her person or the people's tongues and hearts, so that she, with rejoicing visage, did evidently declare that the words took no less place in her mind than they were most heartily pronounced by the child, as from all the hearts of her most hearty citizens. And the same verses were fastened up on a table upon the scaffold, and the Latin thereof likewise in Latin verses in another table, which I have been displaying here, as hereafter ensueth. So if you didn't hear the words, a visual representation has been left on site for anyone who can read.
Shall we all except you turn off our video so it goes full screen for a moment so people can hit pause if they want to?
We're going to crack on. Greg, take us round another round.
Now, when the child had pronounced his oration and the Queen's Highness so thankfully received it, she marched forward towards Grace Church Street, where, at the upper end, before the sign of the eagle, the city had erected a gorgeous and sumptuous ark, as here followeth.
A stage was made which extended from one side of the street to the other, richly vaulted with battlements containing 3 ports, and over the middlemost was advanced 3 several stages in degrees. Upon the lowest stage was made 1 seat royal, wherein were placed 2 personages representing King Henry VII and Elizabeth, his wife, daughter of King Edward IV. Both of these 2 princes sitting under 1 cloth of estate in their seats, no otherwise divided but that the one of them, which was King Henry VII, proceeding out of the house of Lancaster, was enclosed in a red rose, and the other, which was Queen Elizabeth, being heir to the house of York, enclosed with a white rose, each of them royally crowned and decently apparelled as pertaineth to princes, with sceptres in their hands and 1 vault surmounting their heads, wherein aptly were placed 2 tables, each containing the title of those 2 princes. And these personages were so set that the one of them joined hands with the other, with the ring of matrimony perceived on the finger.
Out of the which 2 roses sprang 2 branches gathered into one, which were directed upward to the second stage or degree, wherein was placed one representing the valiant and noble Prince Henry the English, who sprang out of the former stock, crowned with a crown imperial, and by him state one representing the right worthy lady, Queen Anne, wife of the said Henry VIII, and mother to our most sovereign lady, Queen Elizabeth, that now is, both apparel with sceptres and diadems and other furniture due to the estate of a king and queen, and 2 tables surmounting their heads, wherein were written these their names and titles.
From their seat also proceeded upwards one branch directed to the third and uppermost stage or degree, wherein likewise was planted a seat royal, in which this was set one representing the Queen's most excellent Majesty Elizabeth, now our most dread sovereign lady, crowned and apparelled as the other princes were.
Out of the forepart of this pageant was made a standing for a child, which at the Queen's Majesty's coming declared unto her the whole meaning of the said pageant. The 2 sides of the same were filled with loud noises of music.
And all empty places thereof were furnished with sentences concerning unity. And the whole pageant was garnished with red and white roses. And in the forefront of the same pageant, in a fair wreath, was written the name and title of the same, which was the uniting of the 2 houses of York and Lancaster. This pageant was grounded upon the Queen Majesty's name.
For, like as the long war between the 2 houses of York and Lancaster then ended when Elizabeth, daughter of Edward IV, matched in marriage with Henry VII, heir to the House of Lancaster, so since that the Queen's Majesty's name was Elizabeth, and forasmuch as she is the only heir of Henry VIII, which came of both houses as the knitting up of concord, it was devised that like as Elizabeth was the first occasion of concord, so she, another Elizabeth, might maintain the same among her subjects, so that unity was the end whereat the whole device shot, as the Queen's Majesty's name moved the first ground.
This pageant, now against the Queen Majesty's coming, was addressed with children representing the forenamed personages, with all furniture due unto the setting forth of such a well-meant matter, as the agreement declared, costly and sumptuous set forth, as the beholders can witness.
Now the Queen's Majesty drew near unto the said pageant, and forasmuch as the noise was great, by reason of the press of people, so that she could scarce hear the child which did interpret the said pageant, and her chariot was passed so far forward that she could not well view the personages representing the kings and queens above named, she required to have the matter opened unto her, and what they signified with the end of unity and ground of her name, according as is before expressed.
For the sight whereof her grace caused her chariot to be removed back, and yet hardly could she see, because the children were set somewhat in with the farthest in.
After that, her grace understood the meaning thereof. She thanked the city, praised the fairness of the work, and promised that she would do her whole endeavour for the continual preservation of concord, as the pageant did import.
The child, appointed in the standing above named, to open the meaning of the said pageant, spake these words unto her grace.
Tom, you get to be a child.
Oh, okay. I thought Liza was on the button. The 2 princes that sit under one cloth of state, the man in the red rose, the woman in the white, Henry VII and Queen Elizabeth his mate, by ring of marriage as man and wife unite, both heirs to both their bloods, to Lancaster the king, the Queen to York. In one the 2 houses do knit, of whom as the heir to both Henry VIII did spring, in whose seat his true heir thou, Queen Elizabeth, doth sit. Therefore, as civil war had and shed of blood did cease, when these 2 houses were united into one, so now that jar shall stint and quietness increase. We trust, O noble Queen, thou wilt be cause alone.
And the witch were also written in Latin verses, and both drawn in 2 tables upon the forefront of the said pageant, as hereafter followeth. So there's one chunk of Latin, and there are also the sentences placed therein which concerned unity are these ones that also you probably can't read. But never mind, life's too short. Eric, take up the cudgels, and then Greg, and then we'll pause.
I'm guessing this is after the Latin, yeah?
After the Latin. The Latin is concurrent because it's a visual thing.
These verses and other pretty sentences were drawn in void places of this pageant, all tending to one end, that quietness might be maintained and all dissension displaced, and that by the Queen's Majesty heir to agreement, and agreeing in name with her which tofore had joined those houses which had been the occasion of much debate in the civil war with this realm, as may appear to such as well-searched chronicles, but not to be touched in this treatise, only declaring her grace's passage through the city and what provision the city made therefore.
And ere the Queen's Majesty came within hearing of this pageant, as also at all the other pageants, she sent certain to require the people to be silent, for her Majesty was disposed to hear all that should be said upon to her.
And when the Queen's Majesty had heard the child's oration and understood the meaning of the pageant at large, she marched forward towards Cornwall, always receiving with the like rejoicing of the people. Lots of things I quite like here. I like the image of the Queen reversing back to get a better view. The Queen couldn't see, she couldn't hear, had to tell everyone to shut up.
Yes, I wonder if the chariot went boop, 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 boop.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think it's very. I think chariots these days they sort of do more of a white noise, sort of a white noise and a red noise kind of thing. I think that's how chariots work now.
Okay, so I love the hints about stagecraft, that the child is too far upstage, and the Queen can't. There's too much of a crowd between the child and the Queen can't hear the child over the crowd. But presumably, she said, it says something about she desired to be told what the device was. So presumably that's like, come here, little child, and receive a special blessing and tell me what the thing means.
Yes, or someone who's involved in the pageant itself, just explain what the child is doing again. That would be lovely. Yeah, and there's a very obvious display of attentiveness to everything her subjects are saying to her, and they've obviously tried really hard, and yeah, the stagecraft stuff of that this hasn't quite been properly thought out. I mean, there's an awful lot about this particular device. It's all this entwining of roses. It's all the whole white rose, red rose imagery that they're really leaning into here. But the stage was made which extended from one side of the street to the other, so it's richly vaulted with battlements. It's pretty massive.
It's a big stage, and it seems to have 3 platforms, sort of low ascending in height.
But they put the child in the wrong place.
They have. The child was probably like, shouldn't I be further down stage? And they're like, no, little child. And then afterwards, the child was like, I was bloody right.
Yeah. And so, so we've sort of, in a sense, because we read 2 back to back, we had a sort of opening scaffold at Fenchurch, sort of at the beginning of the procession after passing from the tower, and that was again just a child there uttering their welcome oration. And but that one clearly the audience heard, because the people gave a great shout. Again, we have to assume that this witness is entirely impartial, and all reason. But the fact that she's attentive, or at least she's performatively being attentive, especially things about talking about tongues and hearts. She is the queen of tongues and hearts, obviously. Eric.
I'm just wondering about the bit with the Latin. It's like, yes, in order to avoid further dissension or whatever the line was. And it's like, but people, it's not like everyone can read Latin. So it's kind of, yeah, it just, struck me as bizarre. It's like, shut up, we have panels.
Yeah. I mean, Elizabeth famously was gifted in languages and was taught, I think, Latin, Greek, Hebrew, as well as English and French. Maybe Italian, I'm not sure. But what I love is, yeah, I think she's attentive. I think she is really attentive. I think, given what she went through to get here, she's gonna bloody well be attentive on the day of her coronation. And after that bit of awkwardness with the pageant, she smooths it over. She hears what the device is and she praises it, and she promises that she would do her whole endeavor for the continual preservation of concord, which is what Mary didn't do. Elizabeth will set fewer people on fire, hoping for a total of 0, but fewer.
Well, I mean, she also reigned longer, so you can space them out so much more. Definitely doing the performativeness of it all very, very nicely, and she's definitely present. She's not bored of this whole kind of this gig at all. Really, really with it. I'm enjoying it so far. Anyway, any other thoughts before we move on? No. Okay, let's crack on with some more stuff. I think Liza, you are probably up next.
Let's see. Where did we leave off? Rejoicing of the people?
We've marched towards Cornhill, always receiving the like rejoicing of the people. So we should be approaching the conduit, which I'm sure will be lovely.
And there as her grace passed by the conduit, which was curiously trimmed against that time, adorned with rich banners and a noise of loud instruments upon the top thereof, she espied the second pageant. And, because she feared for the people's noise that she should not hear the child which did expound the same, she inquired what that pageant was ere that she came to it. And there understood that there was a child representing her Majesty's person, placed in a seat of government, supported by certain virtues, which suppressed their contrary vices under their feet, and so forth, as in the description of the said pageant shall hereafter appear.
This pageant, standing in the nether end of Cornhill, was extended from one side of the street to the other. Excuse me. And in the same pageant was devised 3 gates, all open, and over the middle part thereof was erected one chair or seat royal, with cloth of estate to the same appertaining, wherein was placed a child representing the Queen's Highness, with consideration had for place convenient for a table, which contained her name and title.
And in a comely wreath, artificially and well devised, with perfect sight and understanding to the people, in front of the same pageant was written the name and title thereof, which is the seat of worthy governance.
Which seat was made in such artificial manner as to the appearance of the lookers-on, the forepart seemed to have no stay, and therefore of force was stayed by lively personages, which personages were in number 4, standing and staying the forefront of the same royal seat, each having his face to the Queen and the people, whereof everyone had a table to express their effects, which are virtues, namely, pure religion, love of subjects, wisdom, and justice, which did tread their contrary vices under their feet. Stomp, stomp, stomp. That is to wit, pure religion did tread upon ignorance and superstition. Love of subjects did tread upon rebellion and insolency. Wisdom did tread upon folly and vainglory. Justice did tread upon adulation and bribery. Each of these personages, according to their proper names and properties, had not only their names in plain and perfect writing set upon their breasts, easily to be read by all, but also every one of them was aptly and properly apparelled, so that his apparel and name did agree to express the same person that in title he represented. This part of the pageant was thus appointed and furnished.
Two sides over the two side ports had in them placed a noise of instruments, which immediately after the child's speech gave a heavenly melody.
Upon the top or uppermost part of the said pageant stood the arms of England, royally portraitured, with the proper beasts to uphold the same. One, representing the Queen's Highness, sat in this seat, crowned with an imperial crown, and before her seat was a convenient place appointed for one child, which did interpret and apply the said pageant as hereafter shall be declared. Every void place was furnished with proper sentences, commending the seat supported by the virtues and defacing the vices to the utter extirpation of rebellion and to everlasting continuance of quietness and peace.
The Queen's Majesty approaching nigh unto this pageant, thus beautified and furnished in all points, caused her chariot to be drawn nigh thereunto, that her grace might hear the child's oration, which was this.
While that religion true shall ignorance suppress, and with their weighty foot break superstition's head, while love of subjects shall rebellion distress, and with zeal to the prince insolency down tread, while justice can flattering tongues and bribery to face, while folly and vainglory to wisdom yield their hands. So long shall government not swerve from her right race, but wrong decayeth still, and righteousness outstands. Now all thy subjects' hearts, O prince of perfect peerless fame, do trust these virtues shall maintain up thy throne, and vice be kept down still, but wicked put to shame, that good with good may joy, and naught with naught may moan.
Which verses were painted upon the side of the same pageant, and in Latin thereof on the left side in another table, which were these displayed now. And besides these verses, there were placed in every void room of the pageant, both in English and Latin, such sentences as advance the seat of governance, upholden by virtue.
The ground of this pageant was that, like as by virtues which do abundantly appear in her grace, the Queen's Majesty was established in the seat of government. So she should sit fast in the same, so long as she embraced virtue and held vice under her foot. But if vice once got up the head, it would put the seat of government in peril of failing.
The Queen's Majesty, when she had heard the child and understood the pageant at full, gave the city also thanks there, and most graciously promised her good endeavour for the maintenance of the said virtues and suppression of vices.
And so marched on, till she came against the great conduit of Cheap, which was beautified with pictures and sentences accordingly, against her grace's coming hither.
And we'll pause there because yes, we've reached the great conduit. We know where we are. Well, we knew where we were before. But okay, I really quite like this. Is quite a dynamic one. The seat of worthy governance. We've got virtues doing a little tap dance on vices. We've once again got a cute child. The Queen's making clear instructions to make sure the chariot's drawn up close enough to hear the child this time. Thank you very much. Can we not have the debacle of the last time? Yes, park it properly. And that worked really nicely. I quite liked that. It's really setting out the stall, isn't it, of the kind of thing that a good queen is supposed to be doing, stamping on vice. Stamp it out. None of that vice here. Thoughts in the room before we move on to the next one. No thoughts,
Well,
Liza.
I feel like I should have noted before that when they say, as they have said several times, a noise of music, or a noise of loud music in one case, that they're not describing a sound. A noise of music is a band. There's people call themselves like the Queen's noise, or someone's noise, where someone is the person organizing the band. And when it says a noise of loud music, there were certain instruments that were loud instruments that were shawms, cornets, sackbuts, brass, basically brass and woodwinds. Soft instruments are strings, bowed or plucked, generally.
So after the child's speech, we get a heavenly melody. Giving us a sense of that kind of thing.
Perhaps they do have some strings there then, or something. Anyway, I'm delighted by the number of musicians that are getting employment on this day. I hope they were all well paid, and I hope they all spent it on getting epically drunk later.
I'm sure if we dug into the records that there will actually be an awful lot of detail about who got paid for what, actually, what the Waits got. I'm sure. Maybe not that much detail, but I'm sure there'll be something. Tom?
It might just be a cheap shot, but it's very reminiscent of lots of things with the darker side of autocracy. You know, it's sort of like, oh, happy peasants and stamping on virtue, and all the virtues are paraded and all the vices are. It's fake news, really.
Oh yes, I mean, it's a hope. I mean, it's a hope for what her reign will be. I mean, she hasn't done anything yet, to be fair.
Yeah. I mean, this is the thing. I mean, usually, yes, monarchs always tend to get pageantry saying, you know, how great they are, but this is very much. When we do Lord Mayor's shows, it's always at the inauguration of a new Lord Mayor, and it regularly includes admonishments to be moral, to look after people, to protect the weak, to not seek to enrich yourself. And I think that might also be the part of the point of these vices and virtues, that what was it they said, that they that she can sit in the seat of state. So she should sit fast in the same, so long as she embraced virtue and held vice underfoot. For if vice once got up the head, it would put the seat of government in peril of falling. And we've seen that. We've seen that in recent memory. So, so this is, yes, it's pageantry, yes, it's adulation, it's celebration, but it's also very much, it contains a warning.
Yeah. I had something else I was going to say. And just the emphasis on words as well. I mean, it's not just that we've got these tables with these the Latin variations on text. You know, all of these people are labelled. They've all got, you know, signs on them, and we've stumbled across a few interludes where the characters come on with labels on them, quite literally, explicitly stated. So it's just an interesting question of how prevalent that kind of thing is in certain performances and ideas, and you know, how many people would, you know, you might not know how to read, but maybe certain word forms are familiar from different contexts or something like that, and that expectation. And you know, it's for the Queen, obviously. It's not explicitly for everybody else. She's the focus. But I'm always interested in actually the nature of literacy and how far we can push that. Anyway, we need to move on as we're heading towards Soper's lane end of Cheap. So yeah, we really do know where we are. Isn't that nice? So who spoke last? Where are we? Was it Tom? So Eric, take up the cudgel. Read the next two paragraphs before we move on.
Against Soper Lane's End, and it was extended from one side of the street to the other, a pageant which had 3 gates, all open. And over the middlemost whereof were erected 3 several stages, whereon sat 8 children, as hereafter followeth. On the uppermost 1 child, on the middle 3, on the lowest 4, each having the proper name of the blessing that he did represent, written in a table and placed above his head.
In the forefront of this pageant, before the children, which did represent the blessings, was a convenient standing cast out for a child to stand, which did expound the said pageant unto the Queen's Majesty, as was done in the other before. Every of these children were appointed and parelled according to the blessing which he did represent.
And on the forepart of the said pageant was written, in fair letters, the name of the said pageant in the manner following. The 8 Beatitudes expressed in the 5th chapter of the Gospel of St. Matthew applied to our Sovereign Lady, Queen Elizabeth. Over the 2 side posts was placed a noise of instruments.
And all void places in the pageant were furnished with pretty sayings commending and touching the meaning of the said pageant, which were the promises and blessings of Almighty God made to his people.
Before the Queen Highness came into this pageant, she required the matter somewhat to be opened unto her, that her grace might the better understand what should afterward by the child be said unto her. Which was so, that the city had 3 erected the pageant with 8 children, representing the 8 blessings touched in the 5th chapter of St. Matthew, whereof every one upon just consideration was applied unto her Majesty, and that the people thereby put her grace in mind, that as her good doings before had given just occasion, why that the blessings might fall upon her, that so, if her grace did continue in her goodness, as she had entered, she should hope for the fruit of these promises, due unto them that do exercise themselves in the blessings.
Which her grace heard marvelously graciously, and required that the chariot might be removed towards the pageant, that she might perceive the child's words, which were these: the Queen's Majesty giving most attentive ear, and requiring that the people's noise might be stayed.
Thou hast been 8 times blessed, O Queen of worthy fame, by meekness in thy spirit when care did thee beset, by mourning in thy grief, by mildness in thy blame, by hunger and by thirst, and justice couldst none get, by mercy showed not felt, by cleanness of thy heart, by seeking peace always, by persecution wrong. Therefore trust thou in God, since he hath helped thy smart, that as his promise is, so he will make thee strong.
When these words were spoken, all the people wished that, as the child had spoken, so God would strengthen her grace against all her adversaries, whom the Queen's Majesty did most gently thank for their so loving wish.
These verses were painted on the left side of the said pageant, and other in Latin on the other side, which were these.
Just read the next couple of short bits, Liza.
Besides these, every void place in the pageant was furnished with sentences touching the matter and ground of the said pageant. And when all that was to be said in this pageant was ended, the Queen's Majesty passed on forward in Cheapside.
And indeed, we'll just briefly pause there. So that's another little presentation. Once again, in encouraging the audience participation. As the child had spoken, so God would strengthen her grace against all her adversaries. I'm sure that's exactly what was said. I'm sure that's I'm always slightly suspicious of the audience shout-outs, but we shall see. So yes, this is a slightly different tone one. But yeah, 8 times blessed. We got a lot of children. And once again, lots of words, and as Liza explicated just before we got to it, actually, that there was a specific place to put the band. 2 side posts was placed a noise of instruments. So yeah, Liza.
Yeah, and this stage also has what seems to be a thrust built out so the child can stand in front, which seems like better design than the first pageant we came to with the 3 stages and the child too far back. I think that's what that means.
Yeah, we've had a couple of mentions of something like a thrust in the previous ones, so yeah, it seems to be that seems to be there is a child position. I'm not quite sure how actually in that first pageant we had earlier, precisely how the child because I thought there was it was I was a bit confused about how the child ended up upstage rather than downstage on that one. But
well, the downstage bit was the tableau with the two thrones. So anyway, and yes, the fair standing cast out with the child was in the last pageant, and this one, it's a stage with the 8 Beatitudes. But what I love is the Queen is now an old hand at this. She knows she's not going to hear clearly what's being said. So we get, before the Queen's Highness came unto this pageant, she required the matter somewhat to be opened unto her. So she's requiring a synopsis by someone, and then they tell her what it's about, and then she required that the chariot might be removed towards the pageant, that she might perceive the child's words. And then she gives most attentive ear and requires that the people's noise be stayed. This is, first of all, it's a wonderful sort of psychological impression to give that this is a queen who wants to listen, who wants to hear what her people have to say. Second of all, as we know going forward, this is a queen who likes theater. This is a queen who wants the audience to shut up so she can hear the play. This is a queen who listens to the verses that have been written for her. And by the flowering of the arts under her reign, much more than under Mary's, peace to her ashes, we're going to see that this is the kind of Queen Elizabeth I is.
Okay, we're going to move a little further along Cheapside, down to the Standard. So, Tom, I think you take up the cudgels. Cuddles. You take up the cuddles. You can have all the cuddles. And pull back. Right. Yes. Take it away.
At the Standard in Cheap, which was dressed fair against the time, was placed a noise of trumpets, with banners and other furniture. The cross, likewise, was able also made fair and well trimmed, and near unto the same, upon the porch of St. Peter's Church door, stood the waits of the city, which did give a pleasant noise with their instruments, as the Queen Majesty did pass by, who on every side cast her countenance and wished well to all her most loving people.
Soon after that, her Grace passed the cross. She had espied the pageant erected at the little conduit in Cheap, and incontinent, required to know what it might signify. And it was told her Grace that there was placed time. Time, quoth she, and time hath brought me hither.
And so forth the whole matter was opened to her Grace, as hereafter shall be declared in the description of the pageant. But when in the opening her Grace understood that the Bible in English should be delivered unto her by truth, which was therein represented by a child, she thanked the city for that gift, and said that she would oftentimes read over that book, commanding Sir John Parrott, one of the knights which held up her canopy, to go before and to receive it, but learning that it should be delivered unto her Grace, down by a silken lace, she caused him to stay.
And so passed forward till she came against the alderman in the high end of Cheap, for the little conduit, where the companies of the city ended, which began at Fenchurch and stood along the streets one by another, enclosed with rails hanged with cloths, and themselves well apparelled, with many rich furs, and their livery hoods upon their shoulders in comely and seemly manner, having before them sundry persons well apparelled in silks and chains of gold, as whifflers and gardeners of the said companies, besides a number of rich hangings, as well of tapestry, arras, cloths of gold, silver, velvet, damask, satin, and other silks, plentifully hanged all the way as the Queen's Highness passed from the tower through the city. Out at the windows and penthouses of every house did hang a number of rich and costly banners and streamers, till her Grace came to the upper end of Cheap.
And there, by appointment, the Right Worshipful Master Ranulph Chumley, Recorder of the city, presented to the Queen's Majesty a purse of crimson satin richly wrought with gold, wherein the city gave unto the Queen's Majesty 1,000 marks in gold, as Master Recorder did declare briefly unto the Queen's Majesty, whose words tended to this end, that the Lord Mayor, his brethren, and commonalty of the city, to declare their gladness and goodwill towards the Queen's Majesty, did present her grace with that gold, desiring her grace to continue their good and gracious queen, and not to esteem the value of the gift, but the mind of the givers.
The Queen's Majesty with both her hands took the purse and answered to him again marvellously, pithily. And so pithily that the standers by, as they embraced entirely her grace's answers, so they marvelled at the couching thereof, which was in the words truly reported these.
I thank my Lord Mayor, his brethren, and you all, and whereas your request is that I should continue your good lady and queen, be ye ensured that I will be as good unto you as ever queen was to her people. No will in me can lack, neither do I trust shall there lack any power, and persuade yourselves that for the safety and quietness of you all, I will not spare, if need be, to shed my blood. God thank you all.
Which answer of so noble-hearted a princess, if it moved a marvellous shout of rejoicing, it is nothing to be marvelled at, since both the heartiness thereof was so wonderful, and the words so jointly knit.
When her grace had thus answered the recorder, she marched towards the little conduit, where was erected a pageant with square proportions, standing directly before the same conduit, with battlements accordingly, and in the same pageant were advanced 2 hills or mountains of convenient height.
The one of them, being on the north side of the same pageant, was made cragged, barren, and stony, in the which was erected one tree artificially made, all withered and dead, with branches accordingly. And under the same tree at the foot thereof sat one in homely and rude apparel, crookedly and in mourning manner, having over his head in a table, written in Latin and English, his name, which was Ruinosa Res Publica, a decayed commonweal. And upon the same withered tree were fixed certain tables, wherein were written proper sentences expressing the causes of the decay of the commonweal.
The other hill on the south side was made fair, fresh, and green, and beautiful, the ground thereof full of flowers and beauty. And on the same was erected also one tree, very fresh and fair, under which stood upright one fresh personage, well apparelled and appointed, whose name also was written in both English and Latin, which was Res Publica Bene Instituta, a flourishing commonweal. And upon the same tree also were fixed certain tables containing sentences, which expressed the causes of a flourishing commonweal.
In the middle between the said hills was made artificially one hollow place or cave, with door and lock enclosed, out of which, a little before the Queen's Highness coming hither, issued one personage whose name was Time, apparelled as an old man, with the scythe in his hands, having wings artificially made, leading a personage of less stature than himself, which was finely and well apparelled, all clad in white silk, and directly over her head was set her name and title in Latin and English, Temporis Filia, the daughter of Time, which two so appointed went forward towards the south side of the pageant, and on her breast was written her proper name, Veritas, Truth, who held the book in her hand, upon the which was written Verbum Veritatis, the word of truth.
And out of the south side of the pageant was cast a standing for a child, which should interpret the same pageant, against whom, when the Queen's Majesty came, he spake unto her Grace these words.
This old man with a scythe, old Father Time they call, and his daughter Truth, which holdeth yonder book, whom he out of his rock hath brought forth to us all, from whence these many years she durst not once outlook. The rueful wight that sitteth under the barren tree resembleth to us the form whom when commonweals decay. But when they be in state triumphant, you may see by him in fresh attire that sitteth under their bay. Now since that time again his daughter Truth hath brought, we trust, O worthy queen, thou wilt this truth embrace. And since thou understandest the good estate and naught, we trust wealth thou wilt plant and barrenness to place. But for to heal the sore and cure that is not seen, which thing the book of truth doth teach in writing plain, she doth present to thee the same, O worthy queen, for that words do fly, but writing doth remain.
When the child had thus ended his speech, he reached his book towards the Queen's Majesty, which, a little before, Truth had let down unto him from the hill, which by Sir John Parrot was received and delivered unto the Queen. But she, as soon as she had received the book, kissed it, and with both her hands held up the same, and so laid it upon her breast, with great thanks to the city therefore, and so went forward towards Paul's churchyard. The former matter, which was rehearsed unto the Queen's Majesty, was written in 2 tables on either side the pageant, 8 verses, and in the midst these in Latin.
Sadly, I don't have a slide for these for a reason of me cocking up. The sentences were written in Latin and English upon both the trees, declaring the causes of both estates were these. So the causes of a ruinous commonweal are these: want of the fear of God, civil disagreement, disobedience to rulers, flattering of princes, blindness of guides, unmercifulness in rulers, briber in magistrates, unthankfulness in subjects, rebellion in subjects. See above. Causes of a flourishing commonweal: there's the fear of God, obedient subjects, a wise prince, lovers of the commonweal, learned rulers, virtue rewarded, obedience to officers, and vice chastened. A little more pass over to Greg for the last little chunk of this bit.
The matter of this pageant dependeth of them that went before. For, as the first declared her grace to come out of the house of unity, the second, she is placed in the seat of government, stayed with virtues to the suppression of her vice, and therefore in the third, the 8 blessings of Almighty God might well be applied unto her. So this fourth now is to put her grace in remembrance of the clear state of the commonweal, which time with truth his daughter doth reveal. Which truth also her grace hath received, and therefore cannot but be merciful and careful for the good government thereof.
And there we'll pause. So yes, this is quite well thought out, or at least the argument there that's being placed here suggests it is. We've got a good visual signifier. We've got two hills of a convenient height. 2 hills or mountains of a convenient height. I love some descriptions. And we got 2 trees: the good tree, the good commonweal, and the despairing, wicked one. And but the little details, and the thing is, all of these details are sort of, we go forward and then we go back, and we go forward and then we go back over what happened in this pageant. So all the detail about the book being handed over, and it's being lowered on a thing, and does Parrot bring it to her, or does she go for it in the or is it lowered to her? And it's slightly contradictory at times as well as to precisely how that happened. It's like he almost was sent to go for it, but then in the end didn't, and there was a device to make it happen. So again, there's always that slight problem of getting all the information here in the right order, because it's not quite presented in the right order, and the details are sort of sometimes unhelpful.
Well, I think what what it looks like is that she asks in advance what the next pageant is going to be, which she's done for the last few pageants. They tell her, that she's going to receive the Bible in English as a gift. And then she starts to command Sir John to go before, as in to run ahead of her to get the Bible so he can present it to her. But then she learns that there's a specific stage device that will bring the Bible on stage at a specific time. And so she says, okay, never mind, don't go before, just wait for it. And
she gets to do an ad lib as well. Time have brought me hither. So yeah.
I can't remember any other. Sorry, Eric. I can't remember any other coronation pageant, or indeed any other civic pageantry where the honorees' answers are recorded, or where pageants seem to stop and wait for an answer.
I think, did we have a little bit? I think didn't her mother say something? It may have only been amen or something. It wasn't a lot, but did actually say something. But you're right. I don't think we've had any. We never hear what the Lord Mayor actually says at any of his dues. And I can't remember. It's been a long time since we did some of the much earlier stuff from the Wars of the Roses that this is putting to bed in its declaration. So I can't remember if there was any responses there. But yeah, it's a really nice portrait. I mean, how much of this is true? I say that there are other witnesses, and we may get more data as to the nature of the event itself. But the account is very clear, and has the right level of detail to it that makes me go, yeah, I'll go with this. Once again, the Queen gets 1,000 marks in gold, clearly marked that getting 1,000 marks in gold, which the city, the mayor, etc. has handed with these words. We got his words, the Master Recorder's words, and we got the Queen's speech back, a lengthy speech back. Exactly the same again happened to Elizabeth's mother, and which we got horribly confused about what the 1,000 marks what actually meant, because I misread the text wrong last time. It was very embarrassing. But yeah, exactly the same gig. New monarch coming in. Give us some cash. Liza.
I wonder if it's a yearly tax from the city that they're just presenting ceremonially because this is the first time. Anyway, I love the description of the city companies in their booths with their rich fabrics and their costly, the description really highlights how costly all the materials for the city companies are. And this is important because this is the economic powerhouse of London. This is where the trade happens, where all the guilds are, where the money is. And prosperous city companies mean a prosperous city. And they give her this purse, which not only has gold in it, but it's made of, I think, red silk embroidered with gold, wrought in gold. I think that's what that means. It's embroidered with gold thread. And again, they have companies for this. They have guilds of embroiderers and haberdashers. And the other thing is that the present of a Bible in English is hugely significant. Mm-hmm. Mary, beforehand, having been a Catholic monarch, would have regarded the Bible in English as heresy, and people did try and import the Bible in English, and it was one of the things that could get you imprisoned. Or get you handed over to the Inquisition. It was, but now Elizabeth is a Protestant monarch, and she's, and so the Bible in English takes center stage at her coronation, and people are watching for her reaction. So she receives the Bible and she kisses it and she lays it to her heart, and says she'll live by it, and that is to the generation who've grown up since the Reformation and were suddenly forced to conform to Catholicism again or die, that's going to be a hugely significant and reassuring gesture. What you think of it if you're Catholic, not recorded. Anyway.
Yeah, and it's the thing. It's just additionally, just to say, it's January. This is all happening in January. It's not warm, and they've had basically 2 months to get this together. So the sort of initial meetings to organise the money, the traditional gift to the sovereign. That's. By the inhabitants of the city, which I'm sure really pleased everyone. So it all started in November, and there was a committee of 44 people were put on this particular gig. There's a whole series of subcommittees depending on what part you were organising things for, and in December. So various pageant organisers: Richard Grafton, Francis Robinson, Richard Hills, and Lionel Duckett were in charge of the stuff, and various costumes were lent, and there's some interesting little bits we'll come to in a minute. Anyway, we are now we've passed along a reasonable distance. We are now approaching polls. I think it's Tom next.
From thence the Queen Majesty passed towards Paul's churchyard, and when she came over against Paul's school, a child appointed by the schoolmaster thereof pronounced a certain oration in Latin and certain verses, which also were written as follows.
Now, this isn't all of the Latin. There is an awful lot of Latin that was performed at this particular point. I'm afraid we're just going to skip over it. I apologise to the good performers at Paul's churchyard, but we will, however, just move straight on. So, Eric, next bit of English text, please.
Which the Queen's Majesty most attentively hearkened unto, and when the child had pronounced, he did kiss the oration, which he had fair written in paper, and delivered it unto the Queen's Majesty, which most gently received the same.
And when the Queen's Majesty had heard all that was offered to be spoken, then her Grace marched toward Ludgate, where she was received with a noise of instruments, the forefront of the gate being finely trimmed against her Majesty's coming. From thence, by the way, she went down toward Fleet Bridge, one about her Grace noting the city's charge that there was no cost spared. And her Grace answered that she did well consider the same, and that it should be remembered. An honourable answer, worthy a noble prince, which may comfort all her subjects, considering that there may be no point of gentleness or obedient love showed towards her Grace, which she doth not most tenderly accept and graciously weigh. Greg, read the next few paragraphs.
On the conduit, which was beautified with painting, onto the north side of the street was erected a stage embattled with 4 towers, and in the same a square plat rising with degrees. Upon the uppermost degree was placed a chair or royal seat, and behind the same seat, in curious artificial manner, was erected a tree of reasonable height, and so far advanced above the seat as it did well and seemingly shadow the same, without damaging the sight of any part of the pageant, and the same tree was beautified with leaves as green as art could devise, being of a convenient greatness, and containing thereupon the fruit of the date tree. And on top of the same tree, at a table, was set the name thereof, which was called a palm tree. And in the aforesaid seat or chair was a seemly and meet personage, richly apparelled in parliament robes, with a sceptre in her hand as queen, crowned with an open crown, whose name and title were in a table fixed over her head in this sort: Deborah, the judge and restorer of Israel, Dudic 4.
And Liza, take up the cudgels until the child, which will be Tom.
And the other degrees on either side were furnished with 6 personages, 2 representing the nobility, 2 the clergy, and 2 the communality. And before these personages was written in a table, Deborah, with her estates, consulting for the good government of Israel. At the feet of these, in the lowest part of the pageant, was ordained a convenient room for a child to open the meaning of the pageant. When the Queen's Majesty drew near unto this pageant, and perceived, as in the others, the child ready to speak, her grace required silence, and commanded her chariot to be removed nigher, that she might plainly hear the child speak, which said as hereafter followeth.
Jabin of Canaan king had long by force of arms oppressed the Israelites, which for God's people went, but God minding at last for to redress their harms, the worthy Deborah was judge among them sent. In war she, though through God's aid did put her foes to flight, and with the dint of sword and the band of bondage brast. In peace she, through God's aid, did always maintain right, and judged Israel till 40 years were past. A worthy precedent, O worthy Queen, thou hast, a worthy woman judge, a woman sent for stay, and that the light to us endured always thou mayest. Thy loving subjects will with true hearts and tongues pray.
Which verses were written upon the pageant, and the same in Latin also. The void places of the pageant were filled with pretty sentences concerning the same matter. And we'll just pause there before we move on. So let me just get rid of this image. So I've got a contradictory note here to what's said in the text, because they're saying that the one at this Deborah, etc., is at the conduit was painted, but I've got a note here saying that the painters refused to paint it because they weren't given enough money, so they just hung some cloth instead. So that's one to dig into. That might be something fun. I don't know. Maybe I'm sure there's still some painting, but yeah, maybe more hangings than other things. Once again, we've got trees, and if you didn't know what a tree is, there's some labels telling you what a tree is. So that's helpful. Tree business. Yeah, and yeah. No cost spared. No cost spared, says the people. It's looking good. It's looking good. Thoughts on the room before we move forward. Liza.
So I'm all about this because, as biblical scenes go, this one being Deborah is wonderful. In the book of Judges in the Old Testament, Deborah is the only female judge of Israel. The others are all dudes. And it's during Deborah's time as judge that her people are menaced by Lord Sisera, and Deborah decrees that the victory over Sisera will happen through a woman, and the woman is one of Deborah's people named Yael, who went to Sisera's camp, and while he was asleep, hammered a steel tent spike through his head. So you've got not only the image of a wise and prophetic female sovereign, but you've also got this implied story, which, remember, everyone's been going to mass on Sundays. They hear this stuff regularly, so they'll know that there's that implied second story, which they're too decorous to mention in the pageant, but this implied story of a woman warrior who conquers the adversary, the oppressor, and they know that Spain is going to make a move. They know that the late Queen Mary's husband, Philip of Spain, still thinks he's King of England. So I think that's what this is aiming at. And again, the Queen asks for the pageant to be explained to her and asks to be moved closer. She's paying attention. She knows they've spared no cost or effort putting this pageant on, and she wants to experience it.
Yes, and in fact, the next paragraph I think does address that. I was slightly precipitate in my pausing. So we will carry on the closing note on this particular pageant before we go on to the next little bits of detail. This is effectively the oh no, this is still going on. No, we're going on to separate orations and stuff. Anyway, so Eric, take up the closing details of this pageant.
The ground of this last pageant was that, for as much as the next pageant before had set before her Grace's eyes the flourishing and desolate states of a commonweal, she might by this be put in remembrance to consult for the worthy government of her people, considering God oft times sent women nobly to rule among men, as Deborah which governed Israel in peace the space of 40 years, and that it behoveth both men and women so ruling to use advice of good counsel.
When the Queen's Majesty had passed this pageant, she marched towards Temple Bar. But at St Dunstan's, where the children of the hospital were appointed to stand with their governors, her Grace, perceiving a child, offered to make an oration unto her, stayed her chariot, and did cast up her eyes to heaven, as who should say, I here see this merciful work towards the poor, whom I must, in the midst of my royalty, needs remember. And so turned her face towards the child, which in Latin pronounced an oration to this effect.
After the Queen's Highness had passed through the city and had seen so sumptuous, rich, and noble spectacles of the citizens, which declared their most hearty receiving and most joyous welcoming of her Grace unto the same, this one spectacle yet rested and remained, which was the everlasting spectacle of mercy unto the poor members of Almighty God, furthered by that famous and most noble Prince King Henry VIII, her Grace's father. Erected by the city of London, advanced by the most godly, virtuous, and gracious Prince King Edward IV, her Grace's dear and loving brother. Doubting nothing of the mercy of Queen's most gracious clemency, by the which they may not only be relieved and helped, but also stayed and defended, and therefore incessantly they would pray and cry unto Almighty God for the long life and reign of her Highness, with most prosperous victory against her enemies.
The child, after he had ended his oration, kissed the paper wherein the same was written, and reached it to the Queen's Majesty, who received it graciously both with words and countenance, declaring her gracious mind towards their relief.
From thence her Grace came to Temple Bar, which was dressed finely with the two images of Gotamot, the Albion, and Coronus, the Briton, two giants big in stature, furnished accordingly, which held in their hands, even above the gate, a table, wherein was written in Latin verse the effect of all pageants which the city before had erected. Which verses are these?
And indeed, as ever, they are up there. So we've got Gog Magog, the giant, and his fateful encounter with the Corinius, the Briton, in their wrestling match thing from ancient history, which as we all know from school. That is definitely true and not made up by Geoffrey of Monmouth. Which verses were also written in English metre, so in a lesser table as hereafter followeth. So, Eric, these are the words on the other table in English.
Behold here in one view thou mayst see all that plain. O princess, to this thy people the only stay. What each where thou hast seen in this wide town again, this one arch, so whatsoever the rest contained doth say. The first arch, as true heir unto thy father dear, did set thee in thy throne where thy grandfather sat. The second did confirm thy seat as princess here. Virtues now bearing sway, and vices beat down flat. The third, if that thou wouldst go on as thou began, declareth thee to be blessed on every side. The fourth did open truth, and also taught thee when the commonweal stood well, and when it did then slide. The fifth, as Deborah declared thee to be sent from heaven, a long comfort to us thy subjects all. Therefore go on, O Queen, on whom our hope is bent, and take with thee this wish of thy town as final. Live long, and live long reign, adorning thy country with virtues, and maintain thy people's hope of thee. For thus heaven is one, thus must thou pierce the sky. This by virtue wrought, all other needs must die.
And on the south side of Fleet Street at this particular point was appointed by the city a noise of singing children, and one child richly attired as a poet, which gave the Queen's Majesty her farewell in the name of the whole city by these words.
As at thine entrance first, O Prince of high renown, thou wast presented with tongues and hearts for thy fare. So now, sith thou must need depart out of this town, this city sendeth thee firm hope and earnest prayer. For all men hope in thee that all virtue shall reign, for all men hope that thou none error wilt support, for all men hope that thou wilt truth restore again, and mend that is amiss, to all good men's comfort. And for this hope they pray thou mayst continue long our Queen amongst us here, or vice for us to supplant. And for this hope they pray that God may make thee strong, and as by his grace puissant, so in his truth constant. Farewell, O worthy Queen, and as our hope is sore, that into error's place thou wilt now triumph. Into error's place thou wilt now truth restore. So trust we that thou wilt our sovereign Queen endue, and loving lady stand from henceforth evermore.
While these words were in saying, and certain wishes therein repeated for the maintenance of truth and rooting out of error, she now and then held up her hands to heavenward, and willed the people to say Amen. When the child had ended, she said, Be ye well assured, I will stand your good queen.
At which saying her grace departed forth, through Temple Bar towards Westminster, with no less shooting and crying of the people than when she entered the city, which a great noise of ordnance which the Tower shot off at her Grace's entrance first into Tower Street.
And the child saying earlier is also in Latin verses, written in a table which was hanged up there as displayed previously. Eric, close the session off before we go on to the next witness.
Thus the Queen's Highness passed through the city, which without any foreign portion of itself beautified itself, and received her grace at all places, as hath been before mentioned, with most tender obedience and love, due to so gracious a queen and sovereign lady. And her grace likewise of her side, in all her grace's passage, showed herself generally an image of a worthy and lady and governor. But privately these especial points were noted in her grace, as signs of a most prince-like courage, whereby her loving subjects may ground a sure hope for the rest of her gracious doings hereafter.
Indeed. We have some additional remembrances to follow. But yes, we have a sense. This is a very well-structured pageant. I'm liking this. We have a logical message that's being presented in a series of pageants, and then there's a summing up at the end to make sure that everybody's followed it and understood the message that's to be there. There's that sort of interesting question about the spontaneity of the child at St Dunstan's. Is that sort of semi-official or unofficial? Is that just it just appears? It feels like, look, there's a child who wants to speak. How stage managed are some of these moments? I'm curious about them. Liza.
Well, it seems like it's one of the children's of Christ's Hospital, right? Or because we've just had the finery and pomp of the city, and I'm just scrolling up to get the specifics, that
children of the hospital were appointed
Yeah.
to stand with their governors.
I'm pretty sure that that's Christ's Hospital, and those are either poor kids or foundlings. The governors are the tutors and the people who oversee the kids' lodgings. So we've just had the pomp and pageantry of the city, but these are people who live on charity. And I don't know. I mean, as you say, I don't think this is scheduled, but I think it may be expected. Perhaps St. Dunstan's, whoever's in charge, or whoever's in charge of Christ's Hospital got in touch with the pageant organizer and were just like, we're gonna be on this corner, can you please make sure she stops? They say where the children of the hospital were appointed to stand with their governors. So the children are supposed to be there. It's not a disorder or an interruption. And that gives her this opportunity to say, I here see this merciful work towards the poor, whom I must in the midst of my royalty needs remember. And we've just
she didn't necessarily say that. The text doesn't. It suggests that her gesture says that.
Yes, you're right. But we have just had the passion with the pageant with the Beatitudes, where they allude to they use the Beatitudes to allude to the state she was in before she was crowned, that she was imprisoned in the Tower quite recently, and at any minute Mary might have had her executed for treason. Again, there were various reasons why it was difficult for Mary to do that, but it was a thing she could have done. And they were saying, they were all saying, you were sorrowful, you were mourning, you were poor, and now you're here. So there's something about that connects with this moment, where she hears this child who lives on charity in this charitable institution give her this nice oration, which doubtless the good governors have coached the child very well. Yes.
And be ye well assured, I will stand your good queen, and lots of shouting and lots of shooting simultaneously. It's just, lots of good stuff. Okay, we have some additional material to close off with. This is all certain notes of the Queen's Majesty's great mercy and clemency and wisdom used in this passage. So we've already had a certain amount of reportage of dialogue said during the progress. We now have these various accounts as well. So we'll see what we get out of this. So Greg, we'll go around the room once again. Tell us some anecdotes.
About the nether end of Cornhill toward Cheap, one of the knights about her grace had espied an ancient citizen which wept, and turned his head back, and therewith said this gentleman, Yonder is an alderman, for so he termed him, which weepeth and turneth his face backward. How may it be interpreted that he doth so? For sorrow, aye, or for gladness?
The Queen's Majesty heard him and said, I warrant you it is for gladness, a gracious interpretation of a noble courage which would turn the doubtful to the best. And yet it was well known that as her grace did confirm the same, the party's cheer was moved for the very pure gladness for the sight of her Majesty's person, at the beholding whereof he took such comfort that with tears he expressed the same.
In Cheapside her grace smiled, and being therefore demanded the cause, answered, for that she had heard one say, Remember old King Henry VIII, a natural child, which at the very remembrance of her father's name took so great a joy, that all men may well think that as she rejoiced at his name, whom this realm doth hold of so worthy memory, so in her doing she will resemble the same.
When the city's charge without partiality, and only the city, was mentioned unto her grace, she said, It should not be forgotten, which saying might move all natural Englishmen heartily to show the obedience and entireness to their so good a queen, which will in no point forget any parcel of duty lovingly showed unto her.
The answer which her grace made unto the Master Recorder of London, as the hearers know it to be true, and melting hearts heard the same, so may the reader thereof conceive what kind of stomach and courage pronounced the same.
What more famous thing do we read in ancient histories of old time than that mighty princes have gently received presents offered them by base and low personages? If that be to be wondered at, as it is passingly, let me see. If that be to be wondered at, as it is passingly, let me see any writer that in any one prince's life is able to recount so many precedents of his virtue as her grace showed in that one passage through the city. How many nosegays did her grace receive at poor women's hands? How oft times stayed she her chariot when she saw any simple body offer to speak to her grace? A branch of rosemary given to her grace with a supplication by a poor woman about Fleetbridge was seen in her chariot till her grace came to Westminster, notwithstanding the marvellous wonder of such as knew the present and noted the Queen's most gracious receiving and keeping the same.
What hope the poor and needy may look for at her grace's hand, she, as in all her journey continually, so in her hearkening to the poor children of Christ's hospital, with eyes cast up to heaven, did fully declare, as that neither the wealthier estate could stand without consideration had to the poverty, neither the poverty be duly considered unless they were remembered as commanded to us by God's own mouth.
As at her first entrance, she, as it were, declared herself prepared to pass through a city that most entirely loved her. So she, at her last departing, as it were, bound herself by promise to continue good lady and governor unto the city, which by outward declaration did open their love to their so loving and noble prince in such wise as she herself wondered thereat.
But because princes be set in their seat by God's appointment, and therefore they must first and chiefly render the glory of him from whom their glory issueth, it is to be noted in her grace that forasmuch as God hath so wonderfully placed her in the seat of government over this realm, she in all doings doth show herself most mindful of his goodness, and mercy showed unto her. And amongst all other, two principal signs thereof were noted in the passage.
First, in the tower, where her grace, before she entered her chariot, lifted up her eyes to heaven and said, O Lord Almighty and everlasting God, I give thee most hearty thanks, that as thou hast been so merciful unto me as to spare me to behold this joyful day. And I acknowledge that thou hast dealt as wonderfully and mercifully with me as thou didst with thy true and faithful servant Daniel the prophet, whom thou deliverest out of the den from the cruelty of the greedy and raging lions. Even so was I overwhelmed, and only by thee delivered. To thee, therefore, only be thanks, honour, and praise for ever. Amen.
The second was the receiving of the Bible at the little conduit in Cheap. For when her grace had learned that the Bible was in English, should there be offered, she thanked the city, therefore, promised the reading thereof most diligently, and in continent commanded that it should be brought. But the receipt whereof, how reverently she did with both her hands take it, kiss it, and lay it on her breast to the great comfort of the lookers on.
God will undoubtedly preserve so worthy a prince, which at his honour so reverently taketh her beginning. For this saying is true, and written in the book of truth, He that first seeketh the kingdom of God shall have all other things cast unto him.
Now, therefore, all English hearts and her natural people must need praise God's mercy, which hath sent them so worthy a prince, and pray for her grace's long continuance amongst us.
And thus closes that little witness. there aren't that many witnessing sort of additional details in there, but there are a couple of nice ones. The calling on God before entering her chariot, before the procession starts, and sort of acknowledging that it's been a bit of a journey getting here. Some hardships were had. A repeat, effectively, of the hugging of the Bible bit, kiss it and laying on my breast, which we basically had in the text, the other text. But the bit of her smiling when a child says, or someone says, remember old King Henry VIII. So you're just going, oh, Daddy. Yeah, and someone weeping. Was it for sorrow or happiness? And the Queen says, clearly it's gladness. Clearly it is. And then everyone sort of goes, yeah, it is. We're all happy, aren't we? Everyone's happy, and everyone was happy and stuff.
Well, and he got happier because she noticed him.
Mm.
I'm guessing he was just kind of overstimulated by the moment, possibly.
Yeah. And so here we do actually have more of the suggestion that she did actually say something at Christ's Hospital. Did fully declare as that neither the wealthy estate could stand without consideration had poverty, neither the poverty be truly considered unless they were remembered as commanded to us by God's own mouth. So it does seem that she did say something there. So by that witness. Tom?
Yeah, I mean, it's all a rich tapestry, especially when you think of the background of that she was in the tower, as Lisa said, and on all of this background. The other thing I was wondering was, do they use children a lot, or is this some sort of like some device to show the freshness and innocence of the new age that is about to become?
Well, I mean, most of the texts we've done for any kind of civic event like this, it almost always seems to be children. There are some speeches that are definitely adult. So I don't think there's anything specifically to be read by the use of children. I think they're a convenient workforce for this kind of thing. And remember, we're at an age where there are lots of, shall we say, theatre companies bobbing about, but we don't have the kind of professional theatre world that we'll have in 20, 30 years. So the children, you can grab children from choral schools and things and use them very efficiently in a way that perhaps you can't for other things. Plus they're lighter, so you can build stages more efficiently.
Plus, as we noticed when we did the Lord Mayor's show, their high voices carry quite far.
Sometimes.
Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, as there are problems with crowd noise here, as is documented.
But also, we have the note that amid the crowd, people can't hear the children sometimes, or can't really hear anything. So there's that sort of double bind that we have with so many mentions of pageants, of just that thing of couldn't hear a damn thing, couldn't see anything. It's very similar to what we've got with civic pageantry as well. That was I think that was a really well put together passage for the Queen the day before her coronation. She's going to get coronated tomorrow. It doesn't look like it rained. Crisp January day, perhaps. Following this and the coronation, a couple of days later, they're going to start taking everything down. We have notes to say that all the pageant stuff is taken down, and try and make sure you keep anything useful for future pageants. And there's an audit as well to make sure that nobody overspent. So it's always nice when you get useful data. Any final thoughts from the room, Tom? I quite like that. There's enough there to do something with it. I feel that we need to maybe be a bit more imaginative in doing stuff with this one, because there isn't that much performance text, but there's quite a lot of chat that could be interpolated and dramatized and something done with it.
Yeah, I think the only thing that's missing is 6 virtuous knights.
Well, you can't always have 6 virtuous knights. There are definitely defenders.
Or somebody carrying a sign saying 6 virtuous knights.
Indeed. Eric, any final thoughts?
Well, also it's very different to the Anne Boleyn one we had, which was like sort of, yes, Henry dubbed so many people knights of the realm on this day and so on and so forth, and then you had like 200 knights or something and walking ahead of her and that kind of thing. This is very sort of, it's not so much it feels intimate, but like sort of it's almost like it's just her and 5 other people, although it's probably not. I mean, she probably has a full procession.
The text isn't interested in telling us all the people and the order of which they walked. No, you're absolutely right.
And I'm just wondering how they did the stomping bit, because like I'm like, if you let someone stomp on you, it's gonna hurt.
Yeah, I have to say that was an image I quite liked, the virtue stomping on vices, and I'm quite interested in, is there a tap dancing, clog dancing quality to it all? But yeah, it's so much more personal, isn't it? It's whereas we didn't really get the impression that Anne Boleyn was just sort of there and stuff was happening, but it was much more interested in the procession and all the other stuff that went with it. Whereas here, it's very much her personality is imposing itself on the pageant, and her cues of when things happen is very, very, imposed there, or at least as far as the account tells us. I mean, again, we don't know how much of this is stage managed. We don't know how much of this is true. But I think at this end of her reign, I think, she's allowed a day of happiness, and we don't have to be too cynical about the truth of some of this. I believe there are some additional witnesses, so there might be some additional detail we can add to this to test the veracity of what actually happened. Liza, any final thoughts?
Well, a lot of these pageants, the scripts that have survived or have been printed, they do a very good job of documenting the pageants, some stage directions, where music was used, what devices were used, what everything looked like in the poetry that was spoken. We get that. I can't remember a single other pageant where the person being honored, where their reactions were recorded in such detail. We've gotten a little bit. I mean, other people have said we had a little bit of that with Anne Boleyn's coronation, Elizabeth's mother, of course. But this really seems like it was written down not just as a pageant script, but as a memoir of the event. And, doubtless that was done with a very canny eye as to what people would want to buy or what people would want to read. Printer got to make some money, but as a historical document, it's very worthwhile. And I love the theatricality of those pageants and those reactions and the moment where you can't quite hear the child, so you ask the people to move the chariot that you're triumphantly riding in a bit closer to the stage, please.
And it does seem that
I should get a chariot for Glastonbury this summer?
Yeah, why not? I think, and it was printed fairly swiftly off the back of the actual event itself. So sharing this was very important. Yeah, and we were. I mean, spoilers a bit. We do have other events of this similar thing with Queen Elizabeth, where her interaction with people is reported again. So there is more of this kind of stuff later on in her reign. So we will have more. There is more to come. Not necessarily immediately, but one day soon. Greg had to nip out, but otherwise, any final thoughts in the room? Otherwise, I'll close the session. Yeah, all that remains is to thank all the wonderful readers for all the wonderful reading. Thank you very much, everyone, and goodbye. A noise of instruments.